But that difference and the results of this conference are going to be worthless if we don't go out from here to make a difference to the lives of other people. ICT4D is fundamentally about making a difference to the lives of some of the poorest and most marginalised people in the world. How we can use technology to deliver on that. So I would just at the beginning, like everybody here, to make it their mission that by the end of this conference they will go away with just one idea about something that they're going to do differently to make the lives of the many, many poor and marginalised people in the world a little bit better.
So the one thing I think, other than both commending Tim and Dorothea and the team for having put on such a wonderful program, is to say that if you're bored at any time during these 4 days, it's nothing to do with the organisers or the diversity of offerings in the program. Look closer to home. So with that, please enjoy yourselves. I apologise in advance if the weather dampens spirits. It's likely to get colder as the week progresses, but at least inside, both in terms of the central heating and in terms of the atmosphere, it should be warm enough to keep you both interested and fully engaged. Please enjoy this conference and welcome once again to Royal Holloway.
But in my case, it's to invite some of the people who I think have been absolutely at the cutting edge of this field of ICT4D in which we are all working. And at the beginning of the conference and the end of the conference, just get them to reflect on what we're doing and what it's all about. So this first opening plenary is very much to invite people who I think have made a significant difference to on-the-ground changes. And actually getting them to tell us boring academics what they think we should be doing.
I thought I would start off with my first thought, which is I still have a problem trying to define what ICT4D is. You know, I think as a technologist and somebody who actually makes things that, you know, it's tools and organizations versus their uses. And I think there's a lot of pigeonholing that goes on with the tools, calling them ICT4D tools. ICT4D organizations, and then sometimes it's just it's equally usable around the world. You know, Hushahidi gives us a unique perspective on this. You know, we came from Africa, and we're now used all over the world too. But you know, we sometimes get pigeonholed as an ICT4D tool, and I don't think that's any more true than if you said Mozilla with Firefox is also an ICT4D tool because it's a non-profit tech organization that also has a tool that's used all over the world. And you can say the same thing for Drupal, it's used by a lot of NGOs. So how does this, you know, I think that's the discussion point that I'd like to hear about as well. How does what's the conflation point between tools and uses?
I think more politics and more context. ICT4D does not take place in a vacuum. And I think the ICT4D academic community tends to often ignore the broader social and political governance context within which the practice takes place. I'd like more critical thinking and analysis.
Something else what ICTD is about. My first question for all researchers from the perspective of practice and development is, how do you make sure that ICTD initiatives are community owned? So when you talk about community ownership, you know, you're talking about a community that's unbounded, a community that's hybrid, and not just geographically located anymore. So we're living in the information age, and so the notion of the community is, as a category, is in a great deal of flux.
Do anything. So I'll just make that point at the beginning. One of the things that I'd love to see in ICT4D is some kind of, this may exist in fact, I'm meant to be aware of it, but there's some kind of directory of who's out there, you know, perhaps just take the academic side, but who's out there, who's doing what, who's interested in what, where their expertise lies, because I think there's a huge untapped resource out there of academics and university staff and so on who provide some real value into ICT4D projects, but many projects that could benefit from that don't know they're there and don't know they're looking for things to research perhaps. So I think that could certainly tie up.
My name is Matthew Smith and I work at the International Development Research Center. where we fund ICT4D researchers in developing contexts working on pressing development problems. And even though we say we fund researchers, really we fund research/practitioners. The divide between the two is very blurry for us. Almost non-existent, because we always insist that something comes of this research. It's not just research for research's sake. So for me, I think how to bridge, because we deal with that all the time. We deal with practitioners who struggle with how to couch their work theoretically, and we work with academics who struggle with how to make an actual, or work to make an impact on the ground. So that's my interest.
Thank you, Anne.
And I work with John Dada in Nigeria, and we actually are in communication every week, you know, from the UK to Nigeria for an hour, having team meetings by Skype. We've been doing this for years, right? So how come that, as I see it, this kind of dialogue isn't going on between, you know, the academic community and practitioners? And I can understand that it's difficult for the academics to find those of us who are on the ground because we're not as visible as they are.
Just, you know, ideas. These are really tying it to a very real need on the ground. So I think that's one way that we. Actually, my business card for is on one hand you have the academic piece, but the other side is part of it now. So when I meet with ideas, I usually can't help it.
That's a good idea. That's a good technology. That's a good communication technology. I have two cards.
But if you can tap up these intentions that they want to, so network operator, the service provider, they have to come up how they can translate their intention into real life. So another question, please.
For example, recently Uganda also adopted an M-Pesa kind of application, whereby people in rural areas are having a problem accessing money from people, for example, in the urban centers. So as long as this was set up whereby these people are willing can receive their money on mobile phones, so many people actually don't know much of the services or the application on mobile phones. But they know as long as I receive a text message telling me, go to this particular area, receive your money, that's fine with them. They're actually willing to spend on that. Again, it's up someone accessing what they need on the device. Not everyone is willing, not everyone wants to know about the internet, about surfing. For the rural areas, for them, for example, if you're looking at the M-Pesa kind of scheme, I send you money, you know how the text message looks like. The moment you see that, you know I've sent you money. If you want to send someone money, you know the particular text message, how it looks. That's that. You won't care about the internet services and so on.
Macquarie University was involved, Gamos from UK and some other consultants, including Ken Banks from Frontline SMS. So it was a very good team. They went out, they looked for the needs of the rural population, came up with like 50 ideas on like this is potential applications that we could build. And then in the end they built like 5 applications together with Grameen Foundation, AtLab, and MDN, which is one of the mobile operators in Uganda.
First thing is quick, intuitive. Which one of these appeals to you most? Because that's what you're going to then be discussing for the next 35 minutes. So what's closest to you? And then we need a process for breaking you guys into 4 groups of about 16.
workshop. We don't make them have a good time with the implications. I'll just let Lotta to introduce the session. We can start.
I just wanted to welcome you all to this private session today, where we'll be discussing ICT and accountability and how ICT can be used to enhance accountability and how it can be an enabler for increased citizen participation in decision-making processes.
If Tulo just tell me, I have a bit of experience on that. So we shall really subordinate the I have then hierarchy. So watching, unless these tools don't get socially interesting until they get technological involved. Memorial Hall, but then it will be at Akinsa. There was always a way to manipulate those meetings based on the bureaucrats who were thinking. So we thought, why not get all that budget information, provide it, put it on a web platform so that anybody with internet access could use it. And what we found out at that time was that only organizations that are privileged, in the same case as Uganda, who are probably one of the 3 million, could access the internet. And the majority of the population could not. So how do you make that information simple in a way that citizens can access it? But then how do you still keep it online so that there's a way that citizens ultimately will move towards using web-based platforms? Because we really don't want to put or keep it on the mobile phones. I'll just go to the number of 12 million users. This comic is in Shell. Shell is a youth message.
It's drawn quite some attention lately. Is this social network analysis thing? When people are on the web, they leave traces of various kinds. They send emails, they go places, they do things, they have contacts. And what you do is you chart these networks to see who is communicating with whom. And reportedly, although nobody really tells me what they do, of course, but reportedly this work is having some success. But then, of course, there are other things. You want to detect things, you want to prevent people from doing things, you want to make people aware and report things they have seen, like we just heard.
So with that, we will get started. Come on up.
Woo! Yeah! Good morning. Behind me is a photo of the monument to the African Renaissance, commissioned by the Senegalese president, designed by a Hungarian, built by the North Koreans. For us, this is a metaphor of the ICTD field, and we explore why, if this is a problem, and why it's a problem. Thanks.
Theoretical exploration of how we have measured information society, and measuring means that how we define it. So depending on how we define it is the things that we are putting our efforts in. So I have analyzed several models. Please come to see the whole analyzers, how we have focused in supply more than demand and more infrastructure than the user. Hi, it's me again. So this second paper takes the theoretical approach that the guy before explained to you and tries to define different stages of digital development and how do we understand digital development, whether they're early progress or not, how we can define them, and especially what is the role to foster the development of the government. I find that the government has a very, very important role, but it's not in expanding more, but in demanding, sorry.
You just mentioned open standards. There's open standards, open access, open source, open data. What's the importance of these trends now to ICTD?
Well, to start with, you should be very careful about sort of saying, well, no, open source and open data and open access and open standards. They're completely different things. You know, open is a word that comes in all of them. But for example, you should, open source is great because, for example, governments who can't afford a lot of money can get software which they don't have to pay money for and which they can fix if it goes wrong. That's open source. But be careful. There's some open source which doesn't use the open standards. So the open standards mean that when you can interoperate with other people. So that, of course, I've been pushing open standards for ages. One of the things I've been pushing open standards for is for data. It's important, for example, for government data, but also it's important for data about ICT for development. So all of the people at this conference, all of the people providing data, it'd be very nice if we were linked data. And that's, if I go to their paper and I can't access the data, it shouldn't be because it's not interoperable. So data interoperability is important. So that's one part of open data. Then you talk about open access. Now that's the question as to what should be actually available. That's another interesting thing. And I think people, as this Trump push at the moment, realizing that developing countries would do well to be very transparent. The more transparent they are, the less corruption they'll have, the more people will trust them, the more investment will come, and that will help them in their growth. So what part of transparency is being open with data. There's also feeling that openness, so that's open access to data about the state of the world, I think is very important as well. But let's not connect that with open, and when you have open access, it's great if the data you get to is open standards. And if you happen to use open source software to read it, well, that's good too, but that's, in a way, they're separate things. It's important that people should be aware of each of those things in order to start with that.
Where students can, connect it to a computer, and then it gives you audio feedback based on that. But we're trying to make it so that it's, it's more easier for the kids, so that the interface is actually more, so that it's more, it's more friendly with the kids, and so they view it as more of as a toy, as opposed to the way it is.
Like very
So for young people interested in technology and development, what would you advise them right now? Like for somebody just coming from university, what would you advise them to do?
I think, think about what you believe in, what kind of world you would like to grow up in. As in, it sounds silly, but I think we're all growing up in that sense. We're still figuring out what kind of world we'd like to see in a decade, 2 decades time, and so on. And technology will help shape that world, or will help us shape that world. And so the way I think we should think about it, including particularly young people, because they've got a lot of decades to come, is to think about, hang on, what kind of world do I want to live in? And therefore, what kind of technologies, how should the technology be shaped to allow that world to happen? And critically examine the technology, whether this is a technology that basically undermines that world, or it supports it. And there's negotiations there, there's discussions between individuals and groups, and there's going to be discussions around power and conflict and money and all of these kind of things, but we need to have these discussions, and we need to have them in a sense that we start with what world is possible and what world we want. And then we get back to, okay, what technological needs are, and not the other way around.
Thank you very much, Professor. I am the blind man, came from Bangladesh. My name is Bhaskar. Unfortunately, I am not seeing you how handsome you are.
Probably fortunate.
is that I think that's a very reasonable criticism of all of us. In fact, it would be rather nice at the next stream of this next conference if we actually had an active ICT for disabilities stream, perhaps, to take account of what you're saying. I think your point is very well made, and I would agree with it. I personally haven't done any work in that domain, but I agree with you that it's an extremely important area, and I think it's good that your criticism of that is heard by this group as a whole, and perhaps some people will take up that challenge. So thanks for your comment.
So, anyway, you remember that instead of then that would, so, and your screen was like this, and screen something like this, it was terrific, perfectly accessible actually, it was so much better than 300 would. Okay, suppose we get with your full, like this. But in fact, you could do things. The Minitel in France, you could do, was a huge industry. Transformed France. Or maybe, anyway, well, looking at my French colleagues in the front there. So suppose instead we say when you get anything, you get this 1200 board which will allow you to do simple things like, how many bits does it need to find out what your bank balance is? How many bits does it need, in fact, to transfer money from one person to another, which is a huge enabler. Even to transfer money over an encrypted link, there's not very many bits involved. So to do the basis of e-commerce, in fact, all kinds of things you could do. For all those things that you hear about being such enablers, finding out what the market price of your product is in the village on the other side of the hill before you have to hump all your stuff over the hill to find out. So you can find out which market to go to. So on, being able to figure out whether your middleman is ripping you off by figuring out what the market price is, figuring out what the weather forecast is for the next week, for example, if you're an arable farmer, and so on. All these things are really, really small amounts of information. So when we talk about transparency, we do not talk about breaking confidentiality, breaking state secrets or military secrets. There is what's funny is that people have focused on one individual who is one of the crowd of people involved in the WikiLeaks group, as though they made the leak. They didn't make the leak. WikiLeaks, despite that, they do not make leaks. They just provide a service of putting things on the web. There is an interesting question, which I don't know the answer as to whether, at the end of the day, it is very, very important for somebody to be able to be anonymous, or at the end of the day, it is very, very important for society as a whole to be able to remove somebody's anonymity. And in fact, I think both things are true, and they will just be battled up eventually to occasionally ending up in the Supreme Court, because both things are important to be able. The whistleblower idea is very important for democracy, and for the overturning of oppressive regimes. The idea that the press should be able to not reveal their sources, for example, is a very important important principle. And the fact that people should be accountable for what they say, and that you can't just go out there anonymously insulting people, libeling them, creating havoc, which then does untold damage across the blogosphere, without any accountability. That is an important principle too, and obviously these principles are in conflict. And we, as society, have to work out rules which allow us to have norms on both sides, allowing both principles to survive, and where they total conflict, have a way of resolving it in each case. That's what my thing is. I've been asked that question a few times. Anyway, so other comments about what
No, I think what's really critical about open government data is, of course, it's about transparency, accountability, but it's also about, for me, giving information that are completely insensitive, but are the source of potential very interesting services. And the mashup of different sources of information can really help decision making. So having access to things like census and looking at where people are living and where are schools, so that kind of thing. That's very insensitive and very useful for the citizens at large. So looking at OTD also as a fuel for potential services that can also improve people's life is really a critical dimension. And focusing only on transparency, that creates tension between government, civil society, where it should be a kind of very powerful tool for everybody.
Yeah, as far as interest in the conference, I mean, you know, I don't think we could be more pleased with the interest in the conference. I think ICT4D as an activity is certainly growing. More people are involved in it. And then, for whatever reasons, there are more and more people who are interested in this conference and attending it as well. And I think that's also great. You know, there's no downside, you know, to that fact.
Okay. Have different Unicode in Devanagari. Okay. So at this point, what we've done is that there is some font, I don't remember which one it was, which was supported by Web Anywhere on eSpeak, and we just used that.
Okay. So does it mean that any language in the import format that can be converted to the
Yes. Yes.
Great. Okay. I can't see both of you at the moment, but that's okay. Excellent. Excellent. Okay, I'll just quickly introduce the context and then pass it on to you guys in Nairobi. So what we are presenting on here is a project that originated from Computer Aid International.
Tell us a bit what you do in your research.
Yeah, well, my research is about creativity in software engineering, and the way I entered that field is because I noticed that although ICTs made this promise of leveling the playing field, the structure of production globally of ICTs is still very divided. So for instance, you know, a lot of the interfaces and the kind of glamorous stuff is done in the West, but there's and places like India and China and Africa as well, they get stuck with the programming. So how is that different from Nike designing the shoes and having them being sewn in the factories in Indonesia? And my interest is on that aspect of it. Sure, you know, it will raise the standards of living for a lot of people, but that hierarchy, is that still going to stay the same? And the reason that's creativity has to do with it is because there are different perceptions of what creativity means. And often, this isn't just in China and Asia, a lot of my experience as growing up in an expat family is that a lot of foreigners, they enter a country, and when things don't go as smoothly for them as they'd like, they say, well, these people aren't very creative. They have no imagination, they don't know how to go beyond the box. And I think we need a much deeper understanding of that.
In School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, so really trying to understand informal uses of mobile technology related to health. So looking at the general population in Egypt and in Bangladesh, but then also looking at the health sector and how the health sector is already starting to use mobile technology to support health. And now I am based at, and actually what's interesting is that when I first discovered Jonathan's work. He was probably one of the first people to start looking at mobile phones in developing country contexts, and it was the most exciting thing for me as sort of like a lone researcher in the mobiles for health space.
Implementation is part and an integral part of the service delivery, not just like a sort of add-on. So I think one thing we did well with regards to that was to look at data management within the Ghana Health Service and make sure that the way we're gathering data is in alignment with their existing health information management systems and what they have planned for the future for this as well. One aspect we didn't manage so well, and I think we're sort of trying to improve that now, is related to what Ilse, you talked about earlier on, is how mHealth projects can increase demand for clinical care. And that's a great thing, but if the service delivery points are not ready for that, then there's limited impact from the intervention. So now we're sort of having to deal with that, try and partner with organizations who are trying to address the capacity and resource issues on the service.
We cannot overload the primary care centers, and let's try to do something else. And why don't we recognize that face-to-face encounters can be as powerful as remote care, although the objectives are different. So relating to the questions, I think that we have to identify the opportunities to work with the government, you know, and to make a difference.
Expresses interest to a number of participants throughout the world. And we got 4 really lively expressions of interest from Africa, from Latin America, Asia, and North America. All of them were interesting. There's only one formal bid, and that was from North America. This was an institution with a very strong presence, an ICD for research, in which had a talented leader. And it seemed that meeting in North America, particularly in Atlanta, would be people from the Caribbean, from Central America, from Latin America. There's no other research would. It also seemed that the scholarships, which has been facilitated for some people to come, would be continued that year, so people from other parts of the world.
Let's see, there's nothing like being the choice 1 out of 1 for the next location. Nonetheless, we're delighted to be able to host this next conference in Atlanta. I want to just talk to you a very little bit about Georgia Tech, as we call it. Georgia Institute of Technology is its formal name. Sometimes we call it MIT, the Georgia Tech of the North, but it's not when too many MIT people are listening. Okay, so Georgia Tech is a relatively urban campus. It's not in the downtown of Atlanta, but it's in an area that's very easily accessible, only a few miles north of downtown, an area we call Midtown. It has a fairly rich history for the United States in terms of the university. It will celebrate its 150th anniversary in about 25 years. So despite being somewhat urban, yes, it will, actually I didn't realize that was a joke. It will be warmer. I feel pretty confident in saying that it will be warmer.
So finally, just wrapping up, along with Ellen Zagura and myself, we have a very good Atlanta-based conference committee of faculty members from the social science and computer sciences. We have an interdisciplinary local conference committee, but more importantly, we will need your help. Some of you we will definitely be approaching, but we would be delighted if you would approach us. Don't make us come after you. Come please to us. We need people to step up and serve on the program committee, workshop and tutorial committee, demo committee, scholarship committee, a mentorship committee, and frankly any other ideas you have. We would be really thrilled to get your input.
A 17th century philosopher said, La critique est aisée, mais l'art est difficile. To criticize is easy, but to actually do something is very hard. So let's always remember that.
And I really want to try to get you inspired to think about research as something that you do to make a difference. Don't just be cynical. Don't just be critical. Try to make a difference.